Good evening, members. As the clock has struck, and I wasn't in here, can we start this evening's meeting? The first thing is, may I take this opportunity to advise you that we're not expecting any fire alarms or drills tonight. So if it does, please remain seated. And Mr. Bailey, to my right here, will assess the situation, give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if appropriate. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. And now to the agenda. Item 1 on the agenda, in fact, has sorted itself out because Councillor Fissenden has managed to get here. Thank you. Notification of substitute members. Do we have any substitute members? No substitute members. Notification of visiting members. Can they approach the desk and state your name, please?
Good evening, it's Councillor Valspring. It's agenda item 10, please.
Councillor Mrs Gooch wishing to speak on items 10 and 11, please. Thank you.
Please excuse the gardening close, but Councillor Perry wishes to speak on agenda item 10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Spooner wishing to speak on item 10, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mike Cumming, just observing but reserve my right to speak on item 10.
Thank you very much. Disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? None. Thank you. Disclosures of lobbying. Right, how is that one too? Can you make a note of who? Oops, at what point have you been lobbied, please?
Item 10.
Item 10.
Same again, item 10.
Yeah, item 10.
Item 10.
Thank you very much, members.
Sorry, and 13. 13.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I be excused for a very short time? Thank you. Sorry for that. Can we continue, please? Item 6, to consider whether any items that should be taken in private because of the possible disclosures of exempt information, and there are no Part 2 items on the agenda tonight. The minutes of Item 7, the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of September 2017. Presume everybody has read those minutes. Go through them page by page. Page 1, any comments? Thank you. Page 2. Great. Page 3. Thank you. Page 4. Right. Page 5. And page 6. Thank you, members. Presentation of any petitions? No, thank you. Question and answer session for members of the public. Anybody would like to speak? No. Right, item 10.
Amending the order of business.
Sorry. No, there is actually, Sam's just pointed out, there is an amendment to items here. Would suggest that there is a change to the order of business, as we've got 2 members of Teeston Parish Council. Sorry, 1 member of Teeston Parish Council here tonight. Speak on the Barming Ward, the report, and Councillor Mrs. Gooch as a visiting member. Therefore, I move that we take item 11 before item 10. Is that agreed, members? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, committee will be familiar, hopefully, with this item, having considered it in September. A consultation exercise was run for the month of October. Every household was sent a letter inviting them to respond to the consultation on the name change. There was a 26% response rate out of the electorate, and of those who responded, 67% were in favour of the name change. Interestingly, for you, as personal observation when I read the comments, it was quite interesting that quite a few people who commented actually didn't know that Teeston was already part of Barming Ward. So even though that was put sometimes as a reason for voting no, it's quite interesting that perhaps they didn't see that. The committee are asked to consider whether to recommend the name change to council. If you do agree to recommend the change, it will be considered at a special meeting of council on the 6th of December at 6:30 p.m, and then we'll go on to hold the normal council meeting after. But you're asked to consider, and I think Councillor Gooch is here to speak as visiting member.
Councillor Gooch, would you like to approach the desk? Thank you.
Good evening, members. Good evening, Chairman, and thank you very much for bringing forward this item, as we have Teeston with us as well this evening. I'll be brief, because this was really an interesting outcome, wasn't it? I'd certainly like to thank the staff who worked with me and with Cathy Hildish to get the information out to the public as best we could. There was a press release. I put notices on notice boards, ran articles in our local newsletters, which were all dead factual. So, because they had to be factual, even to explain, as you rightly have just said, Mrs. Woodhouse, about Teeston is actually part of Barming Ward. And in fact, I discovered it 9 years ago when I first became the councillor for Barming Ward. I thought, Teeston? Well, that's funny. It's not in the name of the ward. And I realised at that time it was quite a quiet neighbouring village, and it was a steep learning curve for me to discover that there was indeed a very substantial village, and a very proud one at that. As I say, the results are really interesting. They made good reading, but I have to say not terribly surprising. I'm not terribly surprised that Barming itself, both residents and the parish indeed, seem to be a bit lukewarm about it, if I can put it in those terms. After all, their name is part of the ward anyway, so why would they think about wanting to change the name? So they're automatically recognised in the name. But however, it's not the same case with Thiessen. It's only in more recent times where we've had quite a few controversial decisions by council in all sorts of different ways that Thiessen has really stood up for itself, and it warrants recognition in its views and the way it handles itself and makes itself known to the council and to the Kent Association of Local Councils, actually, in various ways. So therefore, for that reason and other reasons, I'm going to ask you to please progress and recommend to council the change. It not only does it make sense to bring Barming and Thiessen in line with other ward names, Bolton, Montrosea and Charles Sutton, you've got Marden and Yalding, I could name quite a few others. Actually, it's a bit of a wake-up call to us all actually as councillors, because I think we need to understand better where our electorate is coming from. We think they understand. It's all right for us. We know where our boundaries are. We know where ward councillors and where our patches are and identities and troubles. But the man in the street doesn't. He doesn't need to. After all, he only goes out to vote every 4 years if you're lucky. So, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. So I do think that I hope that we can all learn from this. I certainly have, and in fact, I'd venture to suggest it could be a pretty good article for the next borough update, and I suggest my colleague in Thiessen Parish Council might feel the same way. If the committee may have to manage the expectations of Thiessen, Parish Council and residents, if it decides not to go with the recommendation. I know the recommendation is yours, but I would ask you please to consider going with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. Councillor Cooling. Thank you. You have actually 3 minutes time, so thank you.
I trust I won't delay you for quite that long, but thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. And I want to thank you on behalf of the Parish Council and residents of Thiessen for even considering this request for name change. And I'd certainly like to thank our ward member Faye for a very strong advocacy of the proposal. We have seen the summary of the many survey responses, and it was an impressive, I thought, rate of 27% response. And we thank the officer for her report. It was very, very clear. Thank you very much. We have noticed some uncertainty. We also have noticed some uncertainty about the meaning of ward and parish, and some concerns about any implications of name change. As Faye has already said, perhaps there might be an article in a future edition to help ordinary parishioners understand the subtleties of hierarchy within the authority. A ward name change would be very welcome, and a visible recognition of Thiessen's inclusion within the ward alongside Barming, while having no basis we are aware of for the concerns that were raised in some responses. But why now, you may ask? Well, first of all, the subject has cropped up from time to time for some while, including at our New Year's Day event, which I have to admit alcohol is present, so maybe that does get the debate going. And as a village, we seem to become more active, but maybe that's because my pace of life has gone down as I get older, but it seems to become more active. And we're aware of what we've achieved together within the village. Since the millennium, that's the latest one, our parish has established a land conservation trust that now owns 22 acres and has opened a village shop with an outreach post office with considerable volunteer input and both supported by substantial donations from parishioners. And that is why we continue to benefit from a nursery group, a busy church, Teeson Club, a farm shop, and Teeson Country Park. We are therefore increasingly proud of our village, and many parishioners demonstrate that by active participation in many village activities. We would be grateful to see our pride recognised by Teeson being included in the ward name, and we are therefore hoping that you will recommend the proposed change of ward name to full council so that Barnley and Teeson ward might come into use as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Thank you. Right, I think, can we throw this, sorry. We throw this open to members. Oh, you did, right. Very good. Yes, Councillor Ring, you were first. I did, yes, you were first. My apologies.
That's okay. Well, I don't think there's much else to be said about it. The people are passionate. We've seen that in here. The parish representative and the ward member for there, and I really do believe that they're happy to go where they want to go. So I would like to take it forward that we support this, that goes to full council, and no everything else to be said.
Councillor Borton.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that. I mean, Mr. Chairman, those of us who study electoral boundaries quite closely will know that they are all artificial constructs by nature, as indeed the borough boundary is, and achieving a consensus between getting the interests of each individual community and the boundaries, right, in any local authority, whether that be at parish or ward or any other level, is particularly difficult. Taking this instance, this current Barmin ward, and the fact there's only 2 parishes there and they're about equal population, seems to be a perfectly sensible thing to do, as I think we said last time. So I'm very happy to second the recommendation. Interesting comments, a good little read, I have to say. Yeah. And but it does re-emphasise the point that they are artificial constructs, boundaries, and that people here are more interested in the fact that Teeston should be with Waterbury or in another borough or whatever, and that Barmin should actually be the whole of Barmin and not just part of it, and not part of it in Heathford and part of it in Fant, ultimately. But that's a debate for another day. We did raise at the last meeting the prospect of a community governance review to address some of these anomalies in the parish boundaries in the borough. I think it went down as a note from the meeting. So if we could be updated on how that's going, that would be great, because I actually think that that community governance review is a more important bit of work to the borough as a whole than establishing the correct ward name or reverting it to the correct ward name. So if we could have an update on how that's going, that would be great. But yeah, very happy to second the recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Firmer.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Thank you both councillors for speaking. It's very eloquent and we are completely persuaded. I had a long conversation with Councillor Gooch about how my ward is called Coxheath and Hunton, but actually it contains 5 parishes, so Linton, East and West Farley. So I can't imagine how East and West Farley and Linton feel. We might have to think about a much longer ward name for my ward. But yes, thank you. Of course, I support it.
Yes, as Councillor Borton signalled that he would like to hear from the officers, can you possibly update us on that? Thank you, Councillor Borton.
I'd be delighted to. Thank you, Chairman. So yes, you're quite right. I thought that might have gone. Update on the community governance process. So last time we spoke about whether we should be looking at community governance reviews, looking at the boundaries of the parishes and whether they are right. As you can imagine, this is quite a big and complex process. It's not something we can just go away and do. And actually, it's something we probably have to go through full council. You might need to set up a working group. So with your, if it's okay, what I'd propose to do is bring a report to your next meeting outlining how we would conduct a review, what we would need to do, and then we can decide, or you decide, how you want to take that forward. Is that okay as the next step?
Whoops, you happy with that? Thank you. Okay, we've heard from everybody, and now we've heard the proposal. Is that proposal agreed? Can we take a vote on it? Is that unanimous? Show of hands. Right. Okay. Thank you, members. Okay. Right, 10 now, aren't we? Right. Let's go on to item 10. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Look, can I ask how many members have been lobbied on this particular item again? Can we take a show of hands, please? 2, 3, 4, 5. That's five. I understand from Councillor Vizard that his electronic stuff isn't working, so... But Councillor Hinder.
Mr. Chairman, I haven't checked my emails today, so I may well have been lobbied, but I haven't checked them today.
Right. Okay, thank you. It's a rather late lobby, but on item 10. Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. It's we're on item 10 now. The planning referral process review. Councillor Vorton, would you like to say a bit? Or...
Okay, I will. Excuse me if this isn't particularly slick, but I didn't realise I was presenting until 5 minutes ago. But at this meeting in June or July, this committee resolved to set up a working group to investigate the planning referrals process following the use of the planning referrals committee in May this year. And that working group had the misfortune of having me as its chairman and met twice. Once at the back end of August and once just a few weeks ago. You'll see in your reports in Appendix C and D some of the notes that were presented to the working group and which were discussed upon at each of the meetings. It should be worth saying that the last appendix in the report was only available at the second meeting that the working group held, which was also attended by James Bailey and Russell Fitzpatrick. The recommendations are as on the papers in front of you and come out of the discussions that were held at the time. So that's what the working group agreed to bring back to this committee for further debate and a final decision at this committee.
Thank you. Mrs Woodhouse, can you elaborate a bit more on this at the present time?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as Councillor Bolton said, the working group, this is very much a report from the working group. The only thing I would add is they, as part of the process, they considered a number of different options, including some of the ones I believe you've been lobbied on. So there was consideration given to, do we refer this to full council? And I think the appendices are quite useful in terms of going through the advantages and disadvantages of each type, and that's, I would hope you would have considered that. And the other point I'd make is the working group was the whole committee, so you've all had a chance to be involved at one point or another and have an input into this. And I thought it was quite a thorough piece of work in terms, and the recommendations that the group have reached is about taking referrals to policy and resources. If there is a referral, it goes to policy and resources, but that policy and resources has to be trained and up to the right standard to take those items. So it is a change in direction. The report also sets out the current process. So we do currently have a planning referrals committee, so this isn't, it's not that we're introducing a referral process, there already is one. So this is about how the group saw it being improved, would be the other point I'd like to make. But that's it. It's really for you as a committee to decide what to do next.
Thank you very much. Visiting members, you all signalled your interest in speaking on this particular item. Shall we take ladies first? Councillor Springer?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. When this Planning Referrals Committee last sat, it was the first time I'd ever seen it sit. for, I think, the second time in 10 years. And I have to say, it was not a comfortable experience. My heart went out to the 3 committee members who had been lobbied and lobbied on an incredibly contentious application, and I thought it was an awful process. So I have to say, a review of it was absolutely necessary. Totally agree with that. However, I'm not sure, having thought about it, I actually don't think we should have one at all. We have a planning committee that are fully trained, that can be briefed and have been briefed on financial aspects of planning applications prior to meetings. They're getting quite a good bunch now, quite a good experienced bunch. And I think the decision should rest there. They're a quasi-legal committee, and I do think it's wrong to overturn or potentially overturn a decision of a quasi-legal committee by a non-quasi-legal committee. I just think the process should be that where there are serious financial implications, it should be arranged that a briefing in advance of the committee meeting is given to ensure that all members have time to assimilate the implications and the costs involved, not just prior to the meeting, perhaps the day before. So yes, they absolutely should be briefed, but I think they are a well-experienced, well-trained committee, and I do not see the need to take it any further. It's purely for, I'm sorry, it is for officers to overturn an unpopular decision. And I do not accept that is the right process in the public's eyes. It caused a lot of upset at the time. So I would ask you actually to refuse the recommendation. Not all councils have one of these committees. It's not a requirement for councils to have it. And I think the decision-making should rest with the planning committee as it does with everything else. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Springett. Councillor Gooch, did you intend to speak on this item? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening again, members. First of all, I don't envy the task of the working group. I'm sure that you all debated and discussed and really tore this to shreds, really, and put your hearts on the table. I think the paper is very thorough and well done. And I think it's important to say that because this is such a contentious issue from the word go. So, for me, I've gone fundamental. For me, this is a fundamental question about the role of a councillor. The role of a councillor, and I have gone back to the Constitution because I've changed my mind a lot of times over this. A councillor, of course, is there to represent their own ward and their own constituents. There is no denying that. That is part of our job. The other part of our job is to serve the borough of Maidstone. It is as simple as that in my view, and that is how it needs to be boiled down. I also wanted to just mention, of course, it's the role of the planning committee to determine development control matters, planning applications and all sorts of other things. Of course it is, and they are well trained to do so. However, the assumption is that they do so in accordance with the council's policies. And again, it's as simple as that. The planning committee make their judgment against or within council's policies. Now, of course, planning is subjective. That's what consideration and material considerations are all about. You really do have to decide which way you want to go on a planning application. And of course there will be times when we don't agree with the planning officer's recommendation. That's what planning is. It's not like going to court, I was going to say magistrates' court, but it's not like going to court where you've either got to plead guilty or not guilty, and there's the evidence is there, you are guilty. It's not like that. It's much more subjective. But having said that, if we are going to go against the officer's recommendations, our reasons have got to be crystal clear. Not only have they got to be crystal clear, but they must be justifiable at appeal. And of course, that would be clarified within the confines of our own policy that we as councillors have agreed to. Whether or not we like those policies is another issue. The fact is we've made the policies, we need to stand by them. So that clarity is very, very important, and those reasons for refusal have to be convincing. It wasn't in the previous cases, and that is why there was so much, I will say heartbreak, because it was heartbreak. I would also say that I think the suggestion that it should go to policy and resources is absolutely right and proper. If you look at the purpose of policy and resources, it is to make recommendations to the Council on budget and policy matters. Okay, so far. It is also to retain a strategic overview of risk management. Now, there is a huge risk to this council if we do not have the safeguard, a safety net, of having a referrals committee. Call it what you will. We must have something, because our finance in the current landscape, and indeed future landscapes, we're not going to have the luxury of saying, yes, OK, we'll refuse that, we'll go to appeal, doesn't matter how much it costs. Can't do it. We must have a fail-safe. So I really urge members to agree the recommendation. I think a lot of hard work has gone into it, and I commend members. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've taken a long time, but I feel strongly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. Councillor Perry, I think you signalled next.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. First of all, I've got to say I disagree with Councillor Gooch, what she just said. It's not just about council's policies, it's also about national policies as well that the Planning Committee considers. And I would also point out that we have won many appeals that in the past have been recommended to us that we would probably lose. So I don't buy that argument one bit. I believe we've only used this facility twice, and the recent experience was pretty bad. I mean, I attended it, and I was pretty shocked by it, quite frankly. Now, Ashford, Tunbridge and Malling, Tunbridge Wells, and Sevenoaks don't use this at all. So why do we? It's always concerned me that it could be used to reverse a decision made by democratically elected members. The Planning Committee is made up of 13 members. Are we saying they are incapable of making a decision? It is members who decide, and this is part of our democratic public service. It is members who decide, and it is officers who implement. I am concerned that a democratically agreed decision could be sent to another committee to be reassessed solely on the grounds that some did not agree with it. I see no need for this facility or process. Other neighbouring districts don't require it. Planning committee members are well trained, they're intelligent people, well, I hope they are at any rate, and are perfectly capable of understanding the issues and the implications. They're not stupid. Indeed, I find it rather insulting to think that they wouldn't. It must always be the planning committee decision that is final. It should not have to go to another committee. That is what our democracy is actually all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perry. Councillor Spooner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members. I'm not going to repeat what previous councillors or previous visiting councillors have said, but ideally, I don't think there should be a planning review process at all. As a regulated committee with delegated powers, I think the planning committee should be free from subsequent interference from other committees to make its own decisions and to stand by them. I am aware that other councils do have a planning review process, and if it is accepted that the Borough Council should have a similar process, I would strongly suggest that disputed planning applications be referred preferably to the full council, and if not, to a committee which should contain at least 5 to 7 members, preferably 9. I note that our officers are recommending that such a committee should have full planning training. I would go further, and I would suggest that these members who are determining these disputed planning referrals must have had planning training within the past 6 months. And I would also suggest that they should also have served on the planning committee for at least a period of 2 years within the previous 5 years, so they are bang up to date and know exactly what planning decisions are all about. It may also be necessary to obtain outside help. I have known other councils do this. I've had experience of it myself. This can be obtained from officers of another council or from the members or the planning committee of another council. But I appreciate this is a big ask for those people, and there is obviously a delay and there may be costs involved. There may also be possibilities to obtain outside advice and comments from planning consultancies who can help and advise. But once again, it will have to be a consultancy removed from Maidstone, because simply we cannot run the risk of there being conflicts of interest or local bias being built in. In summary, I think the planning committee should be allowed to make its own decisions without interference. I don't think there should be a planning referral process at all, but if there is, I would like you to seriously consider the suggestions that I've made. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spooner. Councillor Cumming, have you any points you'd like to put forward? Oops, so we go to debate on it. Councillor Thissenden.
Listening to everybody and also being on the committee, I'd like to move the recommendation, please.
Right. Now, is there any other further debate on that point? Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. As a person who's actually sat on this committee, and I think I'm probably the only one in this room that has done, I can tell you it's the most awful experience that I've ever had to go through. The worst one was to get these terrible emails from so-called parish councillors. They were dreadful. Really, really awful. No person should have to put up with that when you are doing a job as an elected member of this council. I feel very strongly that the councillors that sit on the planning committee are experienced. They are democratically elected councillors. When they have sat for two committee meetings and the decision has been the same, why is there a need to go through another rigmarole? It is totally unnecessary. They are democratically elected. Why do we passing it then to another councillor who is going against the decision made by a councillor, one of his colleagues? So I'm sorry, I totally agree with what Councillor Springer and Councillor Spooner has said. I don't think there's any need at all for there to be further discussions on this at all. It should not go any further in the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Borton.
A quick question for an officer. We do not legally need a planning referrals process, do we? That's correct, isn't it? Okay. So and I should probably point out that though I chaired the working group, it doesn't actually mean I agreed with the outcome, the majority outcome of the working group. And I think I made this point clear at the last meeting. We received an interesting letter from this group of groups which seemingly the Kent Association of Local Councils, representing the parish areas of the borough, but not the urban areas of the borough, which was very interesting, although it was probably 6 months too late, considering that the work had already been done on this. And I've got a great deal of sympathy with a lot of what the visiting members said. I don't think there is a... I think if we were designing the Constitution again, we probably wouldn't have a planning referrals process. Having said that, of course, we can refer decisions of a service committee into the Policy and Resources Committee. So that check and balance already exists in this council. And I think some of the arguments we've heard so far can equally be used to that as well, to say that we can't do that process. So now we're under the committee system. I do think perhaps it's not a debate for this meeting. We should look at how each committee operates, how you can refer each committee, decisions of each committee, if that's what you want to do. I don't agree, and I will not be supporting the recommendation on the paper, and it's a long-held view of mine, that actually, in my view, it should go to full council, because the only reasons for not going to full council are logistical issues. And I don't think a logistical issue is a good enough reason in order to turn something down. Ultimately, it might be difficult to train 55 people, but it's difficult to train 15 people as well who don't normally sit on the planning committee. And I made that point at the working group, although the majority of the working group disagreed. So I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, in this instance, I won't be supporting what's been moved so far for those reasons.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Firmer.
Hello, thank you, Chairman, and I'll be seconding the motion to move the recommendation, or have you said. I'm finding this really bizarre, because we all sat in the room. Okay, I made the second one, read the minutes from the first one, and spoke to members that had attended the first meeting, and we might have been in completely different meetings when we were both present, because you agreed with the recommendations that were made by officers, and we quizzed the officers extensively. I mean, this wasn't just a kind of rubber stamping in any way. We quizzed the officers extensively, and I remember discussing the option of going to full council. Was that the best route to go down? And we thought that, possibly not. We thought about whether the people on policy and resources were well trained, and how we could make sure that they would be up to date on planning training. And it was assured that in the same way that members that are on the planning committee can be trained and kept up to date with information, equally the policy and resources committee can be. I find it insulting, actually, that you think Policy and Resources Committee members are stupid, because apparently only Planning Committee members can make difficult decisions. Actually, Policy and Resources Committee members have to make incredibly difficult decisions on huge financial matters that affect the whole of the borough. And I therefore think that this is bizarre, but I think we absolutely should be moving the recommendations that officers are giving us. I'd perhaps like Mr Bailey to speak on why we recommended that it shouldn't go to council, and also why we think a kind of check and balance should be there. I think we've got in the first point on our papers that there should be a check and a balance, and we looked at other council examples of why that was the case, and applications of use. So perhaps Mr Bailey could expand on why the officers have recommended that. And we also had a lawyer in the room who recommended that this was, completely feasible and possible. And so I think to remove that check and balance at all has frankly come out of nowhere. I also find it bizarre that some of the members that have spoken tonight haven't actually approached me in the last few months to ask that we think this through more. And Councillor Hinder did write to the working group and request that her views were thought through. And I completely understand that the process that Councillor Hinder and the members of the referrals committee went through was awful and abhorrent, and no one should have to go through that at all. But by enlarging the number of people that are deciding on these matters, I would like to think we would kind of dilute that in a sense, so individuals wouldn't be attacked in certain ways. And I also think, as someone that has stood in a general election as well, the abuse people get is disgusting, and no parish councillor, I wouldn't like to see any parish councillor, certainly Geraldine Brown, who's representing CALG, speak to people in certain ways, because that is abhorrent and we shouldn't be accepting it. So I would like to second the recommendation, and Mr Bailey, if you can come back on those couple of points. Thank you.
Councillor Fissenden, have you've got any comments on this, as you were the person that proposed this?
Well, yes, I mean, I totally agree with exactly what Emily has said. This isn't going to be on every plan. This is only going to be maybe once or twice a year that we are going to use volunteering resources for. So, you know, I think we need something in place for... Sorry? Well, exactly, but now we have something in place, don't we? So when it happens again, we have something in place to deal with this.
Councillor Ring, you signalled to speak.
Yeah.
First.
I would just like to say I was at that working group, and I think nothing on here was anything that I thought was said any different. I'm very vocal, as everybody knows. So, poor old James and Thingy got their comeuppance, but we got there in the end, didn't we? And that's how it should be, because we are there to question officers and to try and get an answer. I would just like to come. Yes, I did think it was terrible how Wendy was treated and the other two. But I think every time I get an email on these sort of things, it's a type of bullying anyway. Because life is not perfect. But we still got to look at if it's going to take all this money, if we do lose cases. And I understand with the training, but even with the training, this is a political situation. Everything in this council is political. Sorry, I know it's not supposed to be political, but we're not stupid. So all I'm saying is, I think there's got to be a safety net somewhere. I don't think someone can walk away from that, whether you call it planning referrals or whatever you call it. There's got to be a safety net. There's got to be a safety net where 55 of us make a decision. Jesus, is that going to cost that much? So, and money's so tight now. This is how we're all having to work, and businesses are having to work. You know, but I would like to say, because I've got protection now, no one can bully me. I thought I'd never in my life seen people in parishes go for officers that I saw that night. I nearly resigned because I thought, my God, what have we come to? The government's telling us we've got to take all these houses. The government's telling us we've got to. So there's not much else we can do about it. So all I'm saying, that's my little bit. Whether I vote or not, I do believe there should be a safety net somewhere, whatever you call it, against that money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vizard, did you signal to speak? No? Okay. I could do, yes. So you're sitting there very quietly, James. Can you come in on this? No, please. Thank you. Sorry.
I certainly can. Most of you know me. I'm not normally that quiet, but I'd like to answer the Councillor's questions. Before I do that, I'd like to address the key that Councillor Perry and Councillor Springett raised. And what I have heard is the fact of overturning a decision. Well, you know, at the end of the day, it's not overturning a decision because, let's say, we've had 2 of these in 10 years, and I, as an officer, and everyone else as an officer around this table, are here to provide professional recommendations to members. We do not overturn, we do not make decisions. We are here to provide recommendations. So it's been used twice in the 10 years, and I totally understand what members are saying in terms of the Planning Committee, our professional body, quasi-judicial, but all the facts aren't known at that particular time because at the end of the day the decision isn't known when that is made. So in terms of the planning referrals and the reasons why it's called a check and balance and the reasons why the process is set up as it is currently set up is because further facts come out of that discussion. Now, this normally involves a decision to refuse. Now, planning officers don't know what those grounds are at that particular time when that decision is made. So the point of the planning's referrals decision, and the reasons why it's set up as it is once members have given those grounds, and they clearly have to set out those grounds because that's what the Constitution requires them, it is almost like a deferral process, because then what kicks into place is the head of planning gives his recommendation that he considers those are undefendable grounds. We then go and get council advice, and, you know, as professional officers, you would expect us to come forward with further information to inform you on that decision-making process. And that's all we're doing in terms of deferral. And to say it's an overturn, if I can be honest, it's not an overturn, because members of that committee, and at this point it's the deferral committee, have that greater depth of information. So not only now do they have what members would have refused that ground on, so there's a greater emphasis, they know for clarity what it is, point one. Secondly, they have that information that you'd expect us to get, i.e. from council. Are those grounds defendable? And then thirdly, they've got that indication, and obviously we can only estimate what those cost grounds are. Now, I would expect, or I would thought, that you would want to know what the implications of that are coming forward. Now, obviously, we can't turn round and say to you, right, it's X figure. We will try and give you a guesstimation, but at the end of the day, you're still the decision maker, but you've got a greater depth and breadth of knowledge before you making that decision. And the reasons come into the Council's question, because I've, again, not quite so direct, and I'm not going to repeat what's set out on Appendix B, because it's quite clearly set out on Appendix B. The reasons why, when I've discussed with the working group and the recommendation is because on the two occasions we've invoked it, it's been invoked quite quickly, because you then have to arrange the committee meetings, because some of these instances may arise on the basis that you've got to deal with an inquiry that's coming up very soon. You've got to give the council's decision. We're meeting deadlines. I'm not going to go through the exhaustive list, but I think that the issue that we came forward is the full council is quite a difficult, dare I say, an animal or organisation to get together. There are the training elements of it, I accept, but to get everyone together at short notice is an extremely difficult task. And let's not forget, and I think it can't be blown out of context, it's only been used twice. And I think that's the issue that I would only implore you to consider. It's been used twice. It's a check and balance. It is a mechanism for you to get further information. And at the end of the day, you are still then making that decision. You've actually got more information because you've got the full views of the members. You've got the lobbying material that you can come forward with. You've got all that further information. And you're making, dare I say, a more informed decision knowing the rounded facts. And that's in terms of the officer view, but I would obviously say that in terms of the officer, that's quite important because, in the heated debate, some of those issues and the grounds need to be looked at quite carefully. And that's why we do go out and get council advice, and that's why we do have that mechanism. Did I answer your question on the why the full council issue? And I think it boils down to quite squarely, really, that it's a very large organisation to arrange quite quickly. From my experience, I've been involved in both those planning referrals. They had to be arranged quite quickly. There's a lot of process, and by its very nature, we haven't invoked them very often. Quite clearly, we haven't invoked them very often because, and I've said to planning committee members, I think there is a cost award, but I haven't said a significant cost award that's arising. I've said to members, I don't think that's defendable. I haven't invoked that requirement. And it's only been used twice on two very big decisions. And let's not, 50% of those went with the original recommendation. So Woodcut went with the recommendation of the planning committee. And that's quite an important issue. So it wasn't an overturn, but members still made that decision with the full facts, even knowing that there were the cost implications. And all my job really to do is to make members fully aware of those facts and be more informed when you're making those critical decisions. And I think from an officer who sits on planning committee all the time, it's quite an important checks and balance. But as I said, I've never tried to defer the fact that the decision making always rests with those members.
Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually going to agree with Mr Bailey. Hugh did explain it incredibly well. Can I just ask, if this is going to go to the Policy and Resources Committee for determination, will members of the Planning Committee be sitting on that Policy and Resources Committee? Because I can't see why that, I can't see in my own mind that that would be right. I'm just...
Donna, can you...
Yeah, thank you. With predetermination and bias, you are not automatically stopped from making a decision just because you have made a decision previously. So I can't give you a definite answer. It will be every case on its merits. It will depend on what that member said at that meeting. You know, if the decision was, over my dead body, will this go through, then quite clearly they're predetermined and wouldn't be able to make the decision again at Policy and Resources. But often it's not that black and white. So we would have to look at every decision, every individual on its merits, as and when they're called. And as we've heard, that shouldn't be very often.
Thank you. Can I just come back, Mr Chairman, please? The only reason why I asked that question is because I can see exactly the same sort of thing happening with all these dreadful emails flying around and saying, well, they've already sat on the Planning Committee. You know, why are you putting them through that process again? That was why I questioned. And surely if someone sat on a Planning Committee and they actually said, no, you know, I'm against this, then they have already announced that, surely. So why would they then go sit on another committee and be expected to vote something different?
As Mr Bailey's explained, when it will go to P&R, there would be more information provided. So if you are prepared to look at all of the new information and make the decision on that information that's been provided to you, it's not the same decision because you have extra information. So you can be predisposed, but if you are prepared to change your mind, and it doesn't mean you have to change your mind, but if you're going prepared to change your mind and that you will look at all of the new information that is put before you, then you are not predetermined. And of course, predetermination is a decision for the individual member. Legal will advise the member, but it's for the member to make that decision. And if a member doesn't feel comfortable making that decision, then they obviously can give apologies, have a substitute, or if it's part of the main P&R meeting, then you would just remove yourself for that item. So, as I say, that you wouldn't be able to say just because you'd sat on planning committee, you are stopped from making that decision further.
Councillor Borton.
I thought I'd just come back on a couple of things that were said. Firstly, by Councillor Firm, because all of what I said before, what I'm going to say now, I said at the working group meeting, as I stated, though I chaired it, I didn't agree with its outcome. So I can assure her I was there, because I remember her there being two. But there you go. I do come back to what Mr Bailey said, and I take a lot of what he says, and I think there is a debate to be had, as I said earlier, about the need for a check and balance. But I don't actually think that's really... I think we can park that. I think the issue for me at the moment, because I can see where this is going, is about this issue about going to policy resources or going to council. And look, though 55 members is slightly more unwieldy, as it's put in here, than 15 members, it's the more representative body of the whole borough, and as was mentioned earlier, we've got a responsibility to the whole borough, so therefore we should be including the whole borough in these, the members from the whole borough in these decisions. It would take some of the pressure off. OK, 15 is better than 3, but 55 is better than 15 in that. And the argument's sort of made for reducing the decision-making powers to a fewer number of councillors. Well, that to me is actually an argument for reducing the number of councillors full stop. To be totally honest, we may as well just have a council of policy and resources, and the other 40 may as well sort of get on the bikes and go somewhere else. So, as far as I can see, there is actually not a ground, with the exception of it being a slightly more tricky for the officers, to not go to full council on this. And it comes down to, and the reason I'm quite strong on this is it comes down to who we represent. And these are big issues where there's been a significant cost warning made to members of the planning committee. And if there's a significant cost warning, then that decision should be made by the most representative body, which is full council at the end of the day. Yes, Policy and Resources has that devolved responsibility for aspects of the budget, but ultimately that comes from full council anyway. Whenever we change our constitution, it's full council which has to have the final say. So, to me, we are talking, as has been said, about exceptional circumstances. We are talking about, on average, 1 in 5 year events. And to me, that is justifiable grounds. This is not a day-to-day occurrence for it to go to full council. So, based on the conversation we've had so far, if Councillors Fissenden and Firm would like to amend their recommendation so it goes to full council, I would be happy to support it. If they're not, I'll be voting against them.
Mr Bailey.
To take up time on members' debate, but I'd just like to endorse what Donna really said in terms of the reasons why the PNR was put forward as all those suggestions are set out in Appendix B. And I take on board in terms of what Councillor Bolton was saying there, because the reasons why, you know, after investigating all those other bodies that it could be looked at, that the PNR had all the group leaders contained, so they were representative across the party in terms of the spectrum of the people that would be representative on that planning committee. And I think what I would just finish on in saying is that when a planning referrals process is invoked, there's a two-tier decision in it. So it's a planning referrals on a financial implication, but it's also, and the key part to my mind, is it's a decision on the planning application and the planning merits. So there's a two-tier system that's going on in the planning referrals. So you've got to make a decision on the planning application and the merits and the grounds, and then a separate decision, which is weighing in your balance, is what the financial implications are. Now, obviously, those are two separate matters that you have to balance and weigh together and then come up with your conclusion. So it's not just one decision. It's not just a financial decision. And I know that's what's, in terms of, hopefully that comes out in the report. It isn't just a financial decision that's going to sway that decision, but having a background of the whole spectrum of the financial implications of the council, which PNR do have. And that's, I just wanted to put forward, that's why sort of in terms of the officers, after a long discussion, put the PNR forward, and on the basis of their representation across the council board.
Sorry, Mr Chairman, can I just come back on that particular point, because it's my understanding that the 3 other service committees, in addition to PNR, have a quarterly review of their budget at their meetings. Now, I don't sit on any of those 3 other service committees, but that's what my understanding is. So the members on those committees are equally as well-versed as PNR members are in terms of the financial implications for any decision, whether that be a planning decision or otherwise, on the council. So, considering most members, and I don't know the exact numbers, sit on a service committee, I think it's fair to say that that members are, on the whole, well sort of versed on the financial aspect. Obviously, on the planning aspect, I'm pretty sure you can't get through to term as a councillor, I don't think, without appearing at the planning committee if you're not on it as a visiting member for some controversial application in your ward. I mean, that's just going to be pretty impossible. So I think everyone kind of understands when you serve a term of office as a councillor that you're going to have to get up to date with the planning process. And again, I come back to my point about training. Well, training 15 and training 55. There was a further point that was made on the fact that group leaders sit on P&R. Well, that's if you assume that all groups were equally represented on the council, which they're not. And actually, this council's got a problem because its group leaders group seems to be turning into a whole committee of its own, which gives smaller parties far greater representation than they should be. But anyway, that's a slightly separate point. Coming back to this issue on predetermination, though, for members who sit on planning and P&R, if you went to council, you'd have what would you do with the 13 members of the planning committee? You'd have exactly the same issue. And the answer that was given by legal was basically, well, you'll have a bit of a fight about it with the individual member before the meeting on a case-by-case basis, as what happens at the moment, to be totally honest. So it was basically, so I can't say I was hugely convinced by that answer. Having said that, I don't really know what the solution is, because it's not black and white and it's not clear in the Constitution. So I'll shut up now, Mr. Chairman, for the third time, but I will not be voting for this to go to P&R. I maintain my view that this should go to full council, and I'll leave it at that. You'll be pleased to hear.
Thank you. I mean, it is minority parties that do help in this process, obviously, in the planning process, depending upon what side of... It depends on what side of the fence you're sitting on. So, there you go. Councillor Fissenden.
Yes, I just have to say that I'm speechless for the fact that we all sat on this working group committee and we all discussed whether this should go to full council or where it should go. And we all made that decision that it should not go to full council. And that is everybody... I'm sorry, Mr. Councillor Bolton, you were in that working group and we all agreed it should not go to full council. You were the chairman of the group.
I need to get this on the record. I said at the time I didn't agree with recommendations of the working group, okay? And it doesn't mean that I have to endorse what the working group's recommendations were. Now, I don't have to change my mind. Yeah, exactly. And I basically voted against it, and I'm going to vote against it again now.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're... Councillor Firm, and then we're going to go to the vote. I would comment, actually. I think Councillor Springett earlier on and Councillor Perry had some very valid points there, that the planning committee makes the decision at the end of the day. In two times over a period of 10 years, we've had to have a referrals committee, and both of those committees have had very disagreeable times from lobbying and abuse, basically, as have officers. It gets very heated, as you all know, when you're trying to defend an area of woodland or whatever. It gets very heated because you're put there by the people that vote you into place. And I think, this is my personal view, that I think the comments made by Councillor Springett and Councillor Perry were very valid, and they are not in these recommendations. So, but anyway, I think Councillor Firma.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I won't go down a rabbit hole of what Councillor Bolton did or didn't say in the working group, but I just like to conclude on the kind of, because I can see the arguments for council as we discussed it in detail, and I was kind of putting forward the same points as many of you are. I think as councillors, we have to be both idealistic and realistic about what we can achieve. So we have to be idealistic about what we have, hopes and dreams for our residents, how we can make their lives better. And we also are realistic about what is achievable and what we can do in the time given. And I think it's important to consider, in a short amount of time, as Mr. Bailey said, assembling a full council is incredibly difficult. I'd also like to point that, perhaps Mr. Bailey can comment, I'm as guilty as anyone at not being able to make as many training sessions as I'd like to, and I've been wrapped around the knuckles for not attending the ones that I've said I would go to, etc. Now, let's be realistic about the number 55 councillors all attending planning training every 6 months or something like that. I think we have to be realistic about this. It's not 15 versus a much larger number. It isn't the same. Let's be realistic about the time pressures required when a planning decision goes through this process. So assembling a great number of people that all have families, all have work commitments they have to do. And also let's be realistic about the training required. I would leave it at that, but I do think councillors this evening need to decide on how we marry being idealistic and realistic, and how we can be most responsible for the people we represent and for the borough.
Right. Thanks very much for all those that have spoken. The motion to accept this was put forward by Councillor Fissenden and seconded by Councillor Firma. Can we go to a vote as to whether we are happy to accept that? Yeah. Those in favour? And those against?
Sorry, you can't have a name vote because we've already gone to the vote, so sorry.
Okay, any abstentions? One. So on that basis, that recommendation is defeated.
So we need somebody to propose something else.
So is there a second proposal?
I'll make a proposal, Mr. Chairman. That is that the recommendations on the paper remain as they are. However, instead of going to policy and resources, it goes to full council.
Yeah, can we just take a few seconds to write this up? Right, thanks for that. And then everybody's put their penneth in there. Donna is going to read out the decision, or the recommendation. Sorry, recommendation.
So the recommendations will now read, Recommendation 1, that there is a need to provide a check and balance mechanism in relation to planning committee decisions, and there should continue to be provision for the referral of an application to a second body for determination in circumstances where the planning committee votes to continue with a decision that it has been advised cannot be sustained at appeal and which could have significant cost implications for the council's budget, but that body should be full council and the planning referrals committee should be abolished. Recommendation 2 will now read that in the event of an application being referred to full council for determination, then a special meeting of the Council should be arranged for this purpose, and provisions relating to public speaking at Planning Committee should apply. Recommendation 3, that no member will be able to serve on full council without having agreed to undergo the mandatory training required to be undertaken by members and substitute members of the Planning Committee, including training on predetermination of planning applications. The training must be completed before the Council first meets to discharge its functions as the planning referral body and must be refreshed as appropriate.
It's still on.
And recommendations 4 and 5 remain the same. I didn't realise there was 2 over the page. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm just going to come back. Can we just change that? To change the item 3 to no member will be able to serve on that council meeting, and that only council meeting. What I'm trying to say is it's only that council meeting that we need everybody to be trained to who are going to sit on that council meeting. Am I making myself clear? Because it doesn't make clear to me. You quite understand that? That's fine.
Right. Members? Right. Sorry? Yes. Right. Can we go through this once more, please, so that everybody's clear where we're going with it, and then we can open it again for debate?
Okay, so to be clear, I won't read all of number 1 again. Recommendation 1, the only change is on the second to last line, deleting the Policy and Resources Committee and replacing it with full council. Recommendation 2 now reads that in the event of an application being referred to full council for determination, then a special meeting of the council should be arranged for this purpose. The provisions relating to public speaking at Planning Committee should apply. The rest of that recommendation is deleted. Recommendation 3 now reads that no member will be able to serve on the full council operating as a planning referral body without having agreed to undergo the mandatory training required to be undertaken by members and substitute members of the Planning Committee, including training on predetermination of planning applications. The training must be completed before the Council first meets to discharge its functions as the planning referral body and must be refreshed as appropriate. Recommendations 4 and 5 remain unchanged.
Right, we clear on that? Seconder for it? Councillor Hinder got her hand up first. Right. Can we have anybody would like to take part in a debate? Councillor Firmer.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. How recent does the planning training have to be? Does it? Sorry? So yearly?
Obviously, we take to members of the Planning Committee every year what training, and members will need to agree what training we're going to take for that next financial year. So, in effect, yes, it would run on a year basis. Because we set the members agree the mandatory training at that particular time, which is normally around grounds of refusal, conditions, appropriate use of conditions, Section 106 agreements. That's the usual mandatory training basis. But on this one, you're adding in additional legal training on predetermination, which would have to form part of that element as well.
Of course you can.
Thank you. And can I just check, so one of the issues raised before with the 3 members that were in the Planning Referrals Committee as it existed previously had to undergo kind of like fast-track training within like a week or something, and that was quite difficult to arrange. Can I just determine whether full council members that don't have up-to-date training, so those that don't sit on planning committee, presumably, or substitutes on planning committee, would they have to undergo that under a short period of time, or is it a different system?
Yeah, simple question. Yes, because of the way the wording is, they'd have to complete their training before they first meet to discharge their function. Now, obviously, members have the option of attending any planning training if they so wish. Which we go out and offer that training to every members. But obviously it's mainly directed to planning committee members and parish council members. So that invite was still there. It wouldn't stop any members if they wish to attend that meeting. But in my experience, people who aren't required to attend or members probably wouldn't attend. So the answer to your question is if the planning referrals meeting was invoked, and obviously you then need to then go to arranging full council quickly, yes, you would have to get full members, or the 13 members minus the 55 already had those training, would have to be trained very quickly within that week. And I suspect if they weren't trained within that week, they wouldn't be able to sit on the full council meeting of that decision. I think the only thing that I would request if that were to go forward is that, because what I can't do in that short period of time is offer multiple training sessions. Unfortunately, I'm having to do it now at the current time on mandatory training, where I'm having to offer sessions on addition. So I think if you're asking my advice, that if it's a mandatory training session, it is a mandatory training session, because I really can't offer loads of training sessions leading up to a big full council meeting if it's a really contentious application.
Councillor Borton.
Yeah, I think there's a constitutional point, because this couldn't actually be implemented in this municipal year, could it? This could only be implemented as of May. So the Planning Referrals Committee... Oh, so it could. So Council could implement it. The reason I mentioned that was because, of course, the Planning Committee sets its training schedule in June. So I was going to say if it would be implemented in May, then that's a matter for the Planning Committee when they decide the year-long training in June, what Mr Bailey just said.
Councillor Vizard, you signal to speak.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And from the explanation that Mr Bailey's given us just here, Forgive me if I'm not understanding this, but if we call a full council meeting for a particular planning application that's been referred back, and the councillors have not had sufficient training, they will in fact exempt themselves, which actually says it's going to be the planning council members and their substitutes, effectively, that are going to be at the council meeting. Am I right?
No, not necessarily, because, you know, I don't sit on a planning committee. I'm not a substitute on one, but I've still had the planning training. So, you know, so there is...
Training can also be organised before the meeting.
Yeah, as it's been said, training can always be organised before the meeting as well. Councillor Ring.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, this is very important and we'd all like to pack up and go home, no less than me. But at the end of the day, we've got to get this right. It is very important. We've had a joke, we've had a laugh around. Mr. Bailey, I know you work very hard. I don't know you very well, but I presume you work very hard. But also on the basis is, if we need training, you have to give it. And I'm not saying I expect that to be personal training. I do appreciate that. But this is the sort of thing that gives the councillors the upset. Because they're saying, and we're trying to get something going, and then they're saying, oh, an officer said this again. At the end of the day, if we're talking about this, I can see no reason by 1 week we wouldn't have dates together that you've sat down and done with whomever to say this is what we could be doing in January. We're talking about this now. Can't start now because it's got to go to full council. 6th of December? There's no reason why work can't be done and already on that training. That's all I'm saying. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be practical as well.
Yeah. Mr. Bailey, a large number of the councillors that are within that 55 surely must have had a significant amount of training to be able to sit on that committee.
What you're potentially and haven't voted on quite yet tonight is the fact that you'd follow the process adopted by the planning committee. So the planning committee have a process where they have mandatory training, and if you don't fulfil your mandatory training within that period, you cannot sit on the planning committee meeting. So because you're making a planning decision, then, as I said to you, it's optional in terms of if any of the members from full council wish to come to the planning training that we offer over that period of time. But because this is, as I said, a two-pronged decision, you're making a decision on the planning application and financial implications, then my recommendation is that members who are making that decision must have a full understanding in terms of both of what they're being asked to make a consideration on, i.e. the grounds of refusal, are they sustainable? So they must have that understanding of the grounds and how the planning process works and the appeal process and the unreasonable behaviour where appeals comes from. So my view is that, yes, full council members should have that training. And just going back to the issue of what the councillor raised, yes, we are here to represent members. Dare I be slightly controversial in this basis, that we're going through a planning review in terms of resources, best use of time. And yes, we are here to serve members, but in order for me to plan and manage the team that I have to manage, it is almost a two-way thing. I cannot run a department where I've got multiple officers doing multiple training in different areas, because then the message is being diluted. I can't control in terms of the training and the consistency of the training, because it's being run in multiple areas. And let's not forget these officers, and I've sat at planning committee where members are saying to me, why is this application taking so long? Why is it here? I have to be able to focus that resource in the best way to deliver the training to members. And you are asking my recommendation. I think that's why I'm here, is that I think training in a focused way within a limited period of time, as opposed to being sporadic as and when members come. I can't plan or deliver. Yeah. No, I'm just suggesting to members, that's why my suggestion is that it's a focused training session, because it's mandatory, and then we can bring in the consistency along those lines, and that's all I'm suggesting.
Mr Bailey, before we get to 6th of December, is it possible that you could put together a training... for the planning referrals meeting, is it possible that you could set a training session for...
Anything is possible, but the issue that your issue that's here is that you're following the training process established by planning committee.
Yeah.
So the planning committee are the ones effectively who would adopt the training sessions for that year, and then they would then effectively, what you're on the papers here that you voted for, they would then just, those training sessions would just roll forward. So whatever planning committee do, full council would follow. So you can do anything if if you're asked. I mean, that's the problem. But the thing that you're asking to recommend here is follow the process that planning committee have agreed on their training sessions. So my simple question is that I don't think it would be advisable to get something together for training, because what happens if it then goes to planning committee and say I don't agree with it? And then I'm stuck in a position that where am I going to go?
Councillor Borton, let's try. I'm going to try and draw this to a conclusion now.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think this discussion will affect any of the 5 recommendations on the paper. The mandatory training agreed by the Planning Committee is for that municipal year. So were this to be implemented as of the 6th of December, there's kind of no debate to be had what happens between the 6th of December and May 2018. The debate is then to be had by the Planning Committee in June 2018 when it determines its training schedule for the year. It's going to have to take this factor into account as well. And Mr Bailey will know, as Councillor Vizard knows as well, sitting on the Planning Committee, that there are existing issues of the training structure by some members anyway. And I just think that the Planning Committee is going to have it out in June next year, taking this into account too. So what we can do tonight as a democracy committee on this is very, very limited, as far as I can see. And I think we should get on and vote with the 5 recommendations. And perhaps we could, I don't know how it's gone, we've just got to make sure that the planning committee are well aware of this additional demand, which we're asking from the planning officers when it sets its training programme in June next year. Does that make sense?
Does to me. Now, can we go to a vote on this, please? On item... Sorry.
Three councillors to...
Okay, a named vote has been requested. So when I say your name, if you can let us know whether you're for, against or abstaining. For the recommendations as amended by Councillor Borton and seconded by Councillor Hinder. So, Councillor Borton. Councillor Fermor. Councillor Fissenden. Councillor Mrs Hinder. Councillor Lewins. Councillor Newton.
For.
Councillor Mrs Ring. Councillor Vizard.
So that was 4 members for it. 1, 2, 3 against, and 1 abstention. So the motion, as amended, is carried. Thank you very much. I thank visiting members for their comments this evening. As well received. Thank you.
Don't take that loud.
Yeah.
While they clear the room, maybe.
Yeah. While the room's clear, one of the officers wants to take a short adjournment. Have you got? Yep. Members, could we possibly start the meeting, continue the meeting? Thank you. Right, can we resume the meeting on item number 12, which is amendments to the Constitution. I'll pass you over to Donna to go through this item.
Thank you, Chairman. As you're aware, earlier in the year, a constitution review was carried out and proposed amendments were recommended to Democracy Committee. And one of those recommendations was to amend the Council procedure rules to insert what I call the 6-month rule, as it had not been included in the rewrite of the Constitution when it was revised to reflect the committee system. This matter was deferred, and following further investigation, it was apparent that this rule had also been omitted from previous versions of the Constitution. This report recommends that the provision from the model Constitution be inserted into the Council procedure rules to ensure stability in decision-making. Should the committee be minded to approve the recommendation, they have discretion with regards to the number of members required to move a motion to rescind a previous decision, or a motion similar to one previously rejected, as set out in paragraph 1.8. In addition, following the budget meeting, I was asked to look at options for submission of budget proposals to enable sufficient time to enable officers to consider the implications of any alternative amendment and to present sufficient detail at the Council meeting to ensure a balanced budget can be achieved. Proposed wording is set out at paragraph 1.13. Members are also asked to consider whether to limit the business carried out at the budget meeting to ensure sufficient time for discussion. Current business considered at an ordinary meeting of the Council is at Appendix 1. Thank you.
Thank you. A considerable amount of research work has been done on this, and most of the committees basically have a third of all members. And unless anybody has any major concerns about that, so can we just take a vote on that? Yes. Would somebody like to second it? Brian Vizard, Councillor Vizard. Can we go to a vote on it, please? Oh, all right. Let's go. Okay, you're doing the wording then. Right. Bear with me 1 second. It's over the page.
So you just add on and agree that the number of members required is a third. So here. Agree. Yeah. No, you already had it. The number of members required is a third.
Is a third.
It's a third.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
So that's the insertion of it is a third.
Yep. Right. I'll read the recommendation as it is on papers on item 1, which is to consider and recommend to Council for approval the proposed amendment to the Council procedure rules to insert a 6-month rule with regards to motions as set out in paragraph 1.8 of the report, and to agree the number of members required to sign the notice of motion, which will be 1/3 of the members. Agreed? Okay, thank you. Item 2 on the recommendations is to consider and recommend to Council for approval the proposed amendment to the Council procedure rules with regards to the submission of amendments to the budget decision meeting of Council as set out in paragraph 1.13 of the report. That's 1.13, it's over here. There we go. Okay, Donna, can you explain that one?
So I just want to be clear that what I'm proposing is that amendments to the budget are to be made in writing and delivered to the proper officer by 5 p.m. on Monday before the meeting. In proposing any change to the budget, any amendment must ensure that the proposal achieves a balanced budget. This will mean that further proposals on the budget cannot be made at the council meeting. So that all proposals will be submitted. They will be submitted in advance in order that a balanced budget can be produced to the council meeting.
Are all members happy with that explanation? Can we vote on that? That's item 2. Yep. Agreed? Okay, thank you. Item 3. To consider and agree whether or not the business conducted should be limited in any way at a budget decision meeting, and to make recommendations to the council.
So to be clear, I know at the budget meeting last year, the leader decided not to give their statement. So in Appendix 1, there's the extract from the procedure rules that set out the business that takes place at an ordinary meeting. And I'm asking you to consider whether or not you wish to remove any of those items from taking place at a budget meeting to allow sufficient debate on the budget. So it may be that at a budget meeting you wouldn't want somebody to submit a motion to that meeting, because obviously a motion can take a considerable amount of time. But it's really just a proposal to you to say, is there anything that you would wish to remove from the budget meeting or not, and it's just something for you to consider this evening.
Are members happy with that? On item 3 of that, do you want me to read it? To consider and agree whether or not the business... Sorry.
Members would obviously have to make proposals as to whether or not they wanted to delete any of the items. I mean, you might be happy just to keep all of the business at that budget meeting. So it is for you to come forward with any proposals you may have for removing anything out of the order of business at ordinary meetings.
Councillor Bourne.
I don't actually think we need to. I think these things are often best judged on a case-by-case basis. Just because you might have a meeting in the council, a budget meeting, but it might be a particular big thing that's happened that warrants a full discussion at council, and we don't want to find ourselves limited to being unable to do so by a bit of the constitution that probably most people aren't aware of. So I think we need to give ourselves our flexibility in the constitution. So I'd suggest we just leave it alone as it is.
So members okay? Okay. Right. Okay, item 4 on this.
We've got to vote for it.
Just to be clear, obviously, because there is a recommendation 3 that says to consider and agree whether or not business conducted should be limited anyway, we need to take a vote, but we need somebody to sort of move an amendment that there be no change to the order of business.
Is it to be seconded? So can you move it, and Councillor Thissenden seconded it. Okay, can we... members agreed?
No, because you need to put 1 and 2.
That's it. Okay. Number 4, to recommend to Council that the monitoring officer be instructed to make the agreed changes to the Constitution. Are members agreed? Thank you. Item 13 is a review of outside bodies. A review of outside bodies and their update. So I believe there are some changes that need to be considered, and call on Councillor Firmer and Councillor Lissenden. Sorry. Oh, go on then, Angie.
Just for, why not? At the last meeting, there were a number of outside bodies where further information was required for the committee to make a decision on whether they should be appointed to or taken off the list. That's why you've got the report here tonight. The recommendations are outlined on page 40, and they're quite clear. With regard to the Mid-Kent Downs Countryside Partnerships funding, which was raised at the last meeting, the Head of Environment and Public Realm, that's Jen Shepherd, has agreed to meet with the group to see if there are ways we could support the partnership. However, due to financial constraints, it is unlikely that the funding will be reinstated. The funding was removed as part of review of budget by the Head of Regeneration or Planning and Development, so by Rob. So that decision's already been taken, so it's not for committee to look at it again. But this is an update.
Last night, our meeting of communities, this was brought up and we voted against it. We voted on against it because someone sneakily was trying to take it out of our budget. And I felt that we dealt with people that need homes and need feeding, not a charity. So, and so some of these may need looking at because they wanted £10,000 and we all voted no.
Councillor Fissenden.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to move some recommendations, 4 additional recommendations, please, on the outside bodies. There has been some lobbying on these, and I feel that they need to be addressed. It doesn't cost the council any money, and I think we need to relook at them.
I understand these are to do with Maidstone transport.
That's correct, yes.
Strategies.
On the agenda in front of us, we are here to consider 1, 2, 3, 4 outside bodies and 4 outside bodies only, and all the outside bodies that were discussed at the September meeting have been agreed, as in the minutes, as we agreed earlier tonight, to go forward to full council on the 6th of December. So as far as I can see, Mr Chairman, I'm afraid that the only debate tonight is about the 4 outside bodies in front of us here, because we are not in a position, with any information whatsoever about this strange amendment that's come forward, to make a decision on any of the others.
We have spoken with an officer regarding this, and we are allowed to. If I could pass you over to Sam, we are allowed to.
The outside bodies review is the item on the agenda. The 6-month rule hasn't actually been put into place yet, so it would be perfectly possible to move new recommendations that would replace the old ones. Move new motions to replace the old ones feasibly.
Where's I'm concerned that we've had I'm concerned in a public forum we've got information of detailed discussions that have been going on between members and officers on this, and we are now as a committee being asked to make recommendations on outside bodies which we haven't got. There is nothing in this agenda about these transport outside bodies for us to make a decision on tonight. Absolutely nothing. So we can't make a decision And as far as I can see, this is a sneaky way to get around the democratic process, because some people are very unhappy with the decision that was made democratically by this committee in September.
Excuse me, Councillor Bolton, but if you were to read the minutes, it's in the last minutes, if you were to read the minutes. And you haven't even heard what outside bodies we want to do recommendations on yet.
OK, but in the minutes, OK, it just says, and I'm going to get them up now, it just says that it was resolved to grant that the following be recommended to be retained, the following to go to this committee, so on and so forth. It doesn't explain why or the rationale behind that decision. It doesn't have the detail that we had at the September meeting in order to do so. So we had more information when we made the decision in September than we are when we're making the decision now. So therefore, it's not acceptable for us to be discussing these, because we are less informed than we are then. I haven't got the agenda from September. I'd be delighted to hear what your recommendations are, but the reason I got in at that point was because I was of the understanding that this, until Mr Bailey mentioned it, that this wasn't something that was able to be brought up. My point remains about these discussions that have taken place before the meeting, though, and before any of these outside bodies are mentioned. I'd like an answer on that.
Can I just clarify, it is possible to make these amendments? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, the first one is the Collis Millennium Green Trust. Recommended, this is referred. Retained. Read that right. But it's a High Street Councillor appointment.
No money.
No money.
No money.
It's not costing us anything. The second one is Kent. You want to do it one at a time?
Yeah, one at a time, as did it as the last meeting. So, okay. So, the Collis Millennium Green Trust.
Right, thank you very much, Mr Chairman. We decided at the last meeting, in 1.2 on page 41, the criteria in which this would be decided, and I'd like to know if anything, bearing in mind I haven't got the papers, so I haven't actually got the detail that I had at the last meeting in front of me, I'd like to know if there's any changes. If there are no changes, then I'd like to know the grounds in which the member proposing thinks that the decision made at the last meeting should be overturned, because I haven't got that in front of me here tonight. What is unconstitutional and what is wrong about the decision that was made at the committee in September? It's a direct question.
It was an officer's recommendation to retain it, and as a community asset.
Hold on, that was all discussed at the September meeting. And we knew that at the September meeting when it was taken into account, and this committee decided to dispose of it. But I'm asking what new information has come to light since the September meeting in order that you think that this amendment should be, this decision should be changed.
Because it's the work of the trust and the community.
If it would help members, I do have a copy of the original report. That's come prepared. I think, if I'm wrong, what you're referring to is the fact that originally when you considered this as a committee, this one was on the list as an outside body to be retained and appointed by the Democracy Committee. So originally, however, you applied your criteria on the night and you voted the way you did. But that's the context.
Can I make a point of order on all of these? Can I suggest we defer this report to the next meeting so that members have the report, the very detailed appendix that came with the September meeting, in front of them for when they make these decisions? And secondly, that Councillor Fissenden circulates her list and the reasons for her wanting to overturn the decisions of these two members in advance. And that's a proposal.
I am more than happy to circulate my list, Councillor Wharton. No? You've asked me a question.
It wouldn't necessarily be deferring the report you've got on the agenda tonight, because that's very specific. Because that says, look at these. It would be, we don't take a decision to full council till we look again at. So you almost have an additional report on those outside bodies that have been requested to be reviewed, if that's the way you could take it.
So my proposal, therefore, is that, OK, we would have to postpone that decision from the 6th of December council to the council afterwards. I accept that. Based on... look, I'm going to be totally honest here. What happened was some members didn't realise that at the last September meeting that this might happen, and they didn't bother to come and fight for their outside body. That's what happened. And they've now been lobbying over that side of the chamber to get this done, and they're trying to get this in through the back door, Mr Chairman. And I'm going to say this on public record. I think that's an absolute disgrace.
Sorry,
it's got to be stopped.
Borton, I think you're out of order on this one. You are out of order. It is possible to make these changes, I'm advised. Now, are you... which way would you like to take it, as you've proposed them? You'd like to carry on?
Well, I'd like to carry on proposing, please.
The debate as it is, and proposing these?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what we'll do. Sorry, Councillor Hinder.
Mr Chairman, I'm sorry. I want to know the reasons why Councillor Gizman thinks this should be kept. I just want to have it clear in my mind why. We've been through this so many times. And this is exactly what happened the last time. When we tried this, exactly the same exercise, we had exactly the same things. We have to make a decision. There are lots of councils that don't even have outside bodies. Yeah. So for goodness sake, let's be sensible. Let's have good reasons for keeping them. Please.
I quite agree.
This whole lot is going to full council anyway. So it is going to have... You're going to have a second bite of this cherry. So let's listen... That's not fair, but it's worth listening to what Councillor Fissenden and Councillor Firmer have got to say. It's got an opportunity. It will go to full council. It can be decided upon then. Councillor Vizard.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. The recommendation in front of us at the moment is for the three that are here to be passed and moved on, in which case I'm quite happy to second that and move it on. If we've got to defer the other applications, so that we can come back to this committee with the information, I'm quite happy to recommend that the ones that are being held get deferred until the next meeting.
Can we take...
I'm quite happy to come back, yes.
Members agreed on that? Okay. So that...
I think what you'll actually, because there isn't actually something to defer, I think you need a third recommendation that says at the next meeting to the of Democracy Committee, a report will come forward on, and we need to know what they are, so we can on those four, so that we can limit it to those four. So if you can let us know what those four are now, then that, if that's what you want to have as a third recommendation.
Councillor Fissenden, can you say what those four are?
Thank you, Chairman. So the first one is the College Millennium Green Trust. The second is the Kent Community Rail Partnership. The third one is the Medway Valley Line Steam Group. And the fourth one is the Quality Bus Partnership.
Let's have some order.
Mr Chairman, in which case the four that have been named will be that I'll recommend that they come back to us on the next round.
Can we take a vote on that? Okay. There you go. Unanimous. Councillor Hinder, sorry.
Mr Chairman, I totally agree. I'll second what Councillor Vizard said, but I would just like to make, can we please have real reasons why we need to retain them? Because it's getting silly. We're keeping these things for no apparent good reason. I want to have good reasons put before this committee, please, when we make the decision. Exactly. Thank you.
So no more comments? Right.
One at a time.
Yes, okay, the recommend. Yeah, but agreed. Yes, go on then.
I'd like to express a recommendation we don't vote for number 2. I'm reluctant for Maidstone Mine to be deleted from the Council's list of outside bodies, simply because I know the very good work they've done. I know a number of us have visited them and have experienced how good the work they do is. And I think it's very difficult at this present time, when we know mental health is so high on the agenda, to be taking away support. As a council, I think it sends a really wrong message to the general people of Maidstone.
Thank you very much. Councillor Borton.
To reply to, I'd agree with everything Councillor Firmer says about the work that Maidstone Mine do. However, the issue at hand here is that we've set ourselves a criteria in which we've judged the other outside bodies, and Maidstone Mine should be judged by that criteria too. It's unfortunate that Maidstone Mine doesn't fit in the criteria. However, having said that, I'm sure this council will continue to work very productively with them. I'm sure there will continue to be cooperation. All we're suggesting is that in very hard times for the council, that the relationship between the two has to be different. It doesn't mean diminished. It means different. So while I accept everything Councillor Firmer says with the work with Maidstone Mine, ultimately we have set ourselves a criteria here, and if we're to abide by that criteria, then I'm afraid, unfortunately, it should be deleted from the list of outside bodies. That's not to say that we don't appreciate what they do or that the issues that they accept aren't important. It's just to say that the relationship has to change in considering the current policy and the current criteria of the council.
Right, can we take a vote on that?
The council doesn't provide any funding, so it doesn't cost any.
So if you want to start with the recommendation of the paper,
where are we?
Do the
On page
recommendation to bring
40, that's right. Gee whiz, somebody's trying to wear me up, I think.
Right, start with that one.
Right, that's all right. Oh dear. Right, okay, let's go through these one by one. And there's only 50 of them, so anyway, there we go. This report makes the following recommendations to this committee, that is recommended council that the following outside bodies be added to those to be retained but appointed by the relevant committees as listed. Kent and Medway Civilian Military Partnership Board, Chairman of Policy and Resources Committee automatically appointed. Kent Downs Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, Joint Advisory Committee, Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee. And 2, that the following organisations... No. Right, where are we? We're over here now. Yeah, okay. That's it. Right, can I have a proposer for that's right. Seconded, Councillor Firmer. Voting. 4. That's it. Against?
Unanimous.
No. Right. So where are we now? Let's.
Recommendation 2.
Where am I? There we are. Yeah. Okay. On to recommendation 2. The following organisation be added to the list of those to be deleted from the council's list of outside bodies. That's Maidstone Mine. Those in favour? Oh, yeah, we got a proposer that they're going to be deleted.
As it is on the paper.
Yeah. On page 40, item
Does anyone
2,
propose?
that they are deleted from Councillor Borton.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hinder.
Councillor Hinder. So it's those in favour. 1 of deleting Maidstone Mine.
Those in favour.
2, 3, 4. Against.
3. Okay.
Now we need to do the one that was proposed at the beginning about reconsidering the...
report be brought to the next
Yeah.
meeting on.
Have you got those? There they are.
The word and I've got is that a further report be brought to the next democracy committee to reconsider the following outside bodies.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. And then list them. I'll need to get them.
Okay.
You read it out now.
Okay, so now, just to be clear, I think where we got to in the debate before we went to the decisions on the papers is Councillor Vizard moved and then Councillor Hinder seconded that a further report be brought to the next Democracy Committee to reconsider the following outside bodies, and you might have to just correct me, I'll typing them up as you were reading them out. The Collis Millennium Green Trust, the Medway Valley Line, is that? Yep. Steering group. The Community Rail Partnership, Kent Community Rail Partnership.
And the Quality Bus.
Yeah, and the Quality Bus Partnership. Yeah. Quality Bus Partnership, okay.
No, you've done that.
That's already... No, it's just to reconsider it, so it'll come back again. Okay.
So, right, can we take a vote on the list that we've just had, which is Collis Millennium Green Trust, Medway Valley Line Steering Group, Kent Community Rail Partnership, Quality Bus Partnership? Because there isn't anything left.
Take just those. You could say and only those.
Okay, so we're going to take a...
Those in favour of bringing it back? Bring it back to the next
meeting.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
1.
Thank you.
And now declare this meeting closed.